Hey Dulles Church, welcome. My name is Andrew. I'm the student pastor and I'm super glad that you have joined us here today. I'm here to talk to you about some things that happened in the past and that are coming up. The first one actually it was two Saturdays ago at the Dulles South Neighborhood Closet. We had an amazing time coming together and serving there. I was there and it was such a great time to meet other people and to just kind of help. It's a really simple process of being able to help at that event. We collected, Dulles Church, you, me, and everybody else, we collected over 400 pounds of clothing. So great job for that. And we're excited for the next event that we're going to be able to have with the Dulles South Neighborhood Closet. If you were there, if you weren't, we have more of those that are coming up. So keep your eyes open for those. Okay, next week, August 28th, it's the last Sunday of August. It's the last Sunday of summer as well, and we are having a summer luau, a church-wide summer luau. It's going to be at Adam and Christy's house from 4 to 8 p.m. We will not be gathering at Lightridge next Sunday morning. Our church gathering will be the luau later in the evening. So it's going to be from 4 to 8 p.m. We're going to have games, we're going to have food, there's going to be a photo booth. Students, kids, parents, everybody is welcome. Bring your friends, bring your neighbors. It's going to be a really great time. If you have any cool dishes or things that you feel like maybe you want to bring or wondering if you can bring, we have a potluck style sign up. It's not just for food, it's also for things like lawn chairs and tables and canopies and things like that. So go and check that out. All the details can be found either on our website or our app. You just have to click it and it'll take you to the page where it shows you what's happening, when it's happening, and then also the link that you can click to sign up for potluck stuff. Dulles Church, I'm so glad that you are here. I'm excited for Brad's message, and I'm so excited for the rest of this week. Glad that you're here, and I'll see you next time.
Okay, you know that we're in this series that we've been calling this summer the most exciting idea on earth. And we've got several weeks left. We've got about a month left of this series. And from here out, you're going to hear me and see me be pretty direct on some deep thoughts and convictions I have about what is the most precious idea, most compelling idea on this planet. And I'm going to tell you today, this isn't really a political message. It's not really about politics necessarily, but I'm going to say with this election coming up this fall, the midterms, I think many, many people are way off the mark in putting their faith in American politics. So let me explain. Quite a few people in my life, not necessarily in our church, but just in my life or even around the country who are friends that I talk to regularly, look at me as if I'm some sort of freak when I don't express out loud frustrated opinions about the Supreme Court, a certain decision, or championing a decision, or when I don't express frustration about a candidate who gets elected for president or one who does. And it's not that I don't care. I get a lot of times that Brad just isn't very political, or he just doesn't pay attention very much. I pay attention a lot. In fact, I could argue that maybe I pay attention than most people to what's happening in our country. I care deeply about this country. I feel very patriotic. There are things that really concern me deeply about our country or the direction of our country. Elections matter greatly to me. But when someone looks at me like I'm some sort of freak because I don't get upset or I'm not kicking and screaming about something that's happened in the news or some decision that a politician has made, it is because I believe the people way out of bounds and people who are missing the mark are those who've put their faith, their actual, tangible, practical trust in humans. It confines my, it boggles my mind. And so I'm going to look today with you at something that the Apostle Paul says about the church, what the church is supposed to be. Remember, the church is not an organization, it's not a title in a building, and it's not 2 or 3 or 4 leaders up in front on stage. We've kind of created those things throughout church history, just like we've created using religion or using the church platform to guilt people or to shame people into behaving a certain way. That's called organized religion. And that has nothing to do with what Jesus had in mind, why Jesus came to this planet and why he created his church. The church of Jesus are people who believe in him, not just believe that he came and they thoughtfully or cognitively have decided he actually rose from the dead, and so my religious trust is going to be in him to take me into heaven someday. That's not what belief means. Belief is much deeper than that. The New Testament word for belief is, I believe it so much I trust. I'm making decisions in my life. I treat my relationships and look at the world and the future based on what I believe Jesus has done. That's what believer means. That's what belief means in the New Testament. And so the collection of believers, the collection of people who've put their trust in Jesus are the church. People like you and me, as imperfect as we are, still being changed, and a lot to still be changed in us to become more and more like Christ. Even still, we are collectively the church that is the movement of Jesus in this world. And so we're going to look at something that Paul says about this today. The first chapter of Paul's letter to the church at Ephesus. Timothy was the young pastor in the city of Ephesus. This is a new church. Every church then was new in the first century. These are new believers in Jesus who are convinced that he not only died for our guilt and our selfishness, so that we don't have to experience judgment, but he also came back from the dead, meaning he has power over death. Anything that could kill someone, including him, in this broken world because of human selfishness or greed, or he now has power over that kind of death. This early community of believers in the city of Ephesus received a letter from the Apostle Paul, and in the very first chapter, Paul tells us that God's plan, his strategy, is to unite everything that's perfect in heaven, in God's realm, with everything that's broken in this world, making it all new, uniting and blending the two spaces together in Jesus. That in Jesus, what was supposed to be the Garden of Eden forever, what was supposed to be this perfect world of humans reflecting God, would again be blended and married to the realm of God, the presence of God, the activity of God, that all of those two worlds would come together in the person of Jesus. And that this would happen right now on this earth through his church, through you and me, expressing his love, our story of life change, how our hearts, how our selfishness has changed. Actual power in our prayer to see our world changed and to see circumstances and people's lives made better. And so in this first chapter of Ephesians, where Paul is revealing this mystery that it's in Jesus that the Garden of Eden will emerge again, the perfect space of human beings and God's perfection together, that Jesus would bring these two worlds together again, and it would be expressed today through his church, through you and me. And so the Apostle Paul says, when I pray for you, this church in Ephesus, when I pray for you, his community, this is one of his descriptions for church, for you, the church in Ephesus. This is what I say, Father, give them minds ready to receive wisdom and revelation so they may see things people can't normally see, because they are coming to truly know who you are. This is Paul's prayer to God. Let them see the full extent of your power, the full extent of your power that is at work in those of us who believe. Again, that's another description for the church, the community that makes up the church. And may it be done according to your might and power. Wow, what is the full extent of God's power that Paul's praying, that we see and that we understand and that we become clued into? Friends, it is the same might and resurrection power that the Father, God, used in the Anointed One to raise him from the dead and position him at the Father's right hand. That's the kind of power we're talking about. The church is supposed to walk in this same power. The power that raised Jesus from the dead is accessible to you and me. Now, if you've tried to know God on your own, separate from his church, separate from the love and community, you're not going to walk fully in that power. If you continue to practically put your trust in Capitol Hill or the White House or human political leaders, you're just never going to walk in or see more of the activity and power of God at work for your life and through you to others in this world. But when we, the church, recognize that it's the power of God that raised Jesus from the dead that you and I, believing in and trusting in, can actually have access to, then everything changes. Then we start to see things happen that we can't explain, and we see hearts change and lives change, and marriages on the brink of disaster soften and come together, and we see people who've been selfish or bullying become people that everyone enjoys, and people who are elevating others. We actually see human transformation happen, as is happening to you and me because of the love and power of Jesus. There is nothing over Jesus. He's above all rule, all authority, every leader and every power, over every name invoked, over every title bestowed in this age and the next. God has placed all things beneath his feet and anointed him as the head over all things for his church. Now, Paul goes on to say his church is his body. We'll say, and you've probably heard this expressed, that the church is the body of Christ. This is a metaphor that Paul uses many times to express this picture that the church is to be the hands and feet and the mouth and the love and the action of Jesus. And he's the head of this body over all things for his church. This church is his body, the fullness of the one who fills all in all. This is a lot. Paul's saying a lot here. What he's really getting at is that the church is to model the new creation of broken humans, changed by God, becoming fully human or becoming whole. We like to say, well, I'm only human, or humans are a disaster, or, nobody's perfect. That's true, but we were made to be originally, before we broke the world with selfishness, we were made to be fully human, wholly human, the perfect reflection of God. And Jesus came to take broken people and work something new in them so that they become whole. And we actually become fully human again. All right, some of our team leaders here at Dulles and our staff team were able to go to the North Point Drive Conference in Atlanta back in May. This is a church leaders conference. It's for pastors, it's for church staff teams, and it's for church team leaders over our connections team or over various teams in our church. And so 9 or 10 of us were able to go to Atlanta. And one of the sessions on the main stage was Andy Stanley, who's the lead pastor at North Point, and we're a North Point partner church. Andy interviewed a local pastor in Atlanta who just retired, a friend of Andy's. His name is Crawford. And this became one of our favorite sessions. And there was a buzz in the 1,700 people that attended. And among our 9 or 10, we just loved this session. There were so many great takeaways. So Andy interviewed Crawford, and we're going to set up here. I'm going to share a couple of video clips of this interview with you. This is Andy's intro of Crawford, and then one of the early questions that Andy asked Crawford. Now, I'm going to remind you about the word gospel. We don't use the word gospel very much in our church. It can sound like a churchy word, and outside culture doesn't really know what it means. But the original word gospel meant to share really great news. It's the really great news of God. that Jesus brought into this world. That's why Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the stories of Jesus, are the Gospel of Matthew, the Gospel of Luke. So you'll hear that word in this interview. I'm going to let you watch this, and then we're going to unpack it a little bit together and how it relates to the church being God's astonishing answer to all that's broken and all that ails the world. So let's watch this first clip together from the interview in May.
Treat for the next few minutes, because you're going to get to hear from one of my favorite people. Every once in a while, somebody will say, Andy, what are you reading, or who you're reading, or who you're leaning into these days? And so Crawford Loritz is the person I have been leaning into these days. Crawford, he and I actually reconnected just a few weeks after George Floyd lost his life in that tragic, epic event that just, caused appropriate disturbance in our culture and just sent ripple effect through as we're again in the middle of COVID, coming up on a difficult election season, election cycle. And so I called Crawford. I said, will you come over to my house? I'm going to invite some pastors over, and we just need to sit and process this, because we want to get this right in terms of our response as pastors in particular. And he came over, and the nuggets they just poured out. We're just taking notes like crazy. Then since then, I've had an opportunity to have several conversations with him. I take notes as fast as I can. We were having dinner with Crawford and his wife, Karen, who's also here today. We're so thrilled to have both of you. And there was probably 6 couples around this table, and each couple was supposed to share something. And so Crawford starts talking, and I got my phone out, and Sandra's like, put your phone away. I'm like, no, I'm taking notes. Everything this guy says is so significant. So not a few months ago, Crawford was here, and I interviewed him for a worship service, and our staff is like, you got to invite him to drive. So I did. So would you please welcome my friend of yours, Dr. Crawford Loritz. The other interesting thing, because I'm super familiar with the history of that church. I remember the guys that started it years ago. But it was predominantly a white church, like 95%.
Yeah, or higher.
Or higher, yeah. And so when I heard that they had called you and you'd accepted the call, I thought, what a coup for them to get you. But that was just an unusual thing. So a little bit, I know we don't want to talk a lot about that, but what was your thinking going into? Was that awkward? Was that an issue? Was that a factor? What were your thoughts?
No, it wasn't awkward for me, and just to push the rewind button, and that's because of God's sovereign foundations in my life. I was born and raised in the central ward of Newark, New Jersey, first 12 years of my life, and Jersey folks don't get out much. It's just sorry. Sorry about that. So back then, in the 50s and 60s, believe it or not, it was a working class community that was multi-ethnic. And I went to school and played ball with John San Giovanni and Rocco Bonavice, as well as Gerald Adams and Lloyd Cotton. And so growing up, and on the other side of that, though, however, is that my family, particularly my dad, wanted to make sure that we were anchored in who we were as African Americans. Stories of my great-grandfather, Peter, who was a slave and the patriarch of our family. So I grew up with these two streams in my life. So I grew up never thinking that I had to choose ethnically who my friends should be or who I should love. And so I'd always been in those circles. So fast forward, when I came to fellowship, I didn't come to fellowship to make an ethnic statement. However, obviously, I'm committed to the visible representation of the unity of the body of Christ. But I didn't come to make an ethnic statement. And I tell folks who are getting in these spaces that if diversity is your objective, you're going to fail. But if gospel unity is your objective, you will probably succeed. And so I came to love the people and to preach the word.
See, you're going too fast. Say that again. If diverse, say it again. I don't want.
The process cannot be the ultimate objective, okay? If diversity is your objective, then paradoxically, it's going to feed islands of separation.
Why?
Well, because you're going to be putting people in the room who are different, and then you're going to be celebrating those differences, and it lends itself to silos, if not division.
Wow.
It's a paradox.
That is a paradox.
However, if it's gospel unity, unity is always based on sacrifice. Love is always based on sacrifice. It's not quid pro quo. It's not appeasing certain factions. It's disadvantaging myself for the blessing and benefit of another. If that takes place, then that's transformative.
Wow.
That's driven by the Spirit of God, and that creates something that is attractive. And so that was and that was my passion, and
that's what happened.
And that's what happened.
Yeah.
Okay, so when Crawford makes this point, and it was interesting, there's this tension on the stage while this black pastor and white pastor are talking about diversity and what really ails our country, and it was like there were oohs and ahs in the crowd, but then there was also a hush in the room, like, wow. Crawford is talking about a deeper level of expression that leads our country to the real answer that ails us. The thought that just trying to make the room more diverse or making the team more diverse, we're actually calling out differences and different skin colors. And the intent is unity. We understand the intent. But we're actually accentuating our differences. This was a powerful moment when Crawford draws all of our attention back to what he calls gospel unity. What unifies us, what most unifies the church, is not political persuasion or who's being elected or even how diverse the room is. What unifies us is the incredible good news of Jesus, that he's come to change the world. That Jesus came to transform the human condition, beginning with you and your selfishness or your intent to fight back or be defensive with your spouse, or for you to argue about opinions or views about our country. Instead, that we would have this transforming work happen inside of us where we begin elevating others and listening to others and making sacrifices of our own time or our own resources or lives for the sake of people in need. This is what Jesus came to do, and that is ultimately the answer for humanity. And a part of this interview just went as far as to say the answer is never going to be Washington, D.C. It's just not. I care about who's elected. I have my own political opinions. I think decisions can hurt our country or help our country. We're going to talk about this more as we get close to November and close to the midterm election. But I am convinced that Washington, D.C. and human leaders, no matter who he is or who she is, or what party they, or what Supreme Court justices they're going to nominate, none of it is going to lead to changing the human heart. The common thread we all have of selfishness at the root of who we are, and that Jesus intends for us to be selfless, fully reflecting as we grow and develop and become more like Christ, fully reflecting the heart and character of our God. That is what our neighbors are craving. That is what broken homes and hurting kids and hurting marriages and relationships that seem to have left people in devastated circumstances. What the world is craving is you and me having been changed by a power that we don't have. The church has gotten in the way, becoming so political. The church has become, we have bought into American democracy over the last couple hundred years. I'm talking about the church, more than we've bought into the power of Jesus coming out of the tomb. And so on Sundays, we want to be reminded that Jesus has the power to take me to heaven someday, and I have eternal life in front of me. That's hopeful, and we want that. And so we put our faith in the Jesus that can take us out of this bad world someday or secure us for eternity. But in practical everyday life, our faith, many of us, our faith is in America, in America for the world, or in politicians fixing America. And I believe it gets in the way of many people who are looking for true answers on a much deeper level than American politics or the Supreme Court. James says this in the Jerusalem Council. This is in the book of Acts chapter 15. And James has stood up after Peter. Peter has made this great appeal that I believe God, his intent in Jesus is to unite Gentiles and Jews. We've been focused on the Jews and believing that God only loves the Jewish people. This was the Old Testament tradition. We now believe, Peter says, that Jesus has come for the Jews and the Gentiles and to make one new family, one new community out of both as we follow Jesus, as Jesus transforms us. And then James stands up on the heels of that and says, I agree. And then James says this in one verse. This is in Acts 15:19. It is my judgment, therefore, that we the Jewish leaders, Jewish people who believe in Jesus, we should not make it difficult for the Gentiles who are turning to God. Why would we put these man-made constructs or these artificial priorities in the way of people experiencing the reality of Jesus in us? Let's remove anything that looks like true passion or looks like true living that is only going to leave people disappointed and without actual answers for life. Let's remove anything in our church that gets in the way of people seeing Jesus, seeing the true hope of the world, what really heals and makes whole. Here's another English translation of this same verse is called The Voice. This is how the Voice translation reads, Acts 15:19. So here's my counsel, James says. We should not burden those outsiders who are turning to God in having to believe what we believe politically, or having to take on our traditions that just are important to us that have nothing to do with Jesus. I'm going to share another short part of the Crawford interview back at the Drive Conference in Atlanta. And the word evangelicals is used here, and that in modern times has become to mean a political voting group of religious people. Christians in America who vote very much on the right has become known as evangelicals. That's not what the word meant in the New Testament. The word meant to share compelling, great news about Jesus. That's originally what the word meant. So you're going to hear that word in this segment here of this interview with Crawford. Let's watch this together. It's pretty compelling stuff.
Gosh. Okay. So we'll skip all these questions. They're not very good. All right. Let's talk about something that's more fun to talk about. Let's talk about because this is stuff we chat about all the time. We were chatting about it back here. So, and I brought this up first session as well. The pressure to politicize the local church, especially in this last election cycle. And here it comes again. I mean, it's not over. Just what's your take on that? And what would you wave us off of? And then I'm going to ask you, I know you don't like this. Well, I've third time I've done it, so you must not hate it. But I want, you said something in a sermon at Fellowship Church that got you in a little bit of hot water. And I just thought it was amazing. And I didn't tell you I was going to ask you this, but I asked you this in front of our whole congregation in our first interview. And it was great. It took a lot of heat off me. They realized I wasn't the only crazy person. But anyway,
it resurrected some things for me on my social media.
That's right.
Feed. That's quite all right.
Yeah, but you're out now. You're a prophet. You're free. Anyway, so I mean, you are. You're a statesman. Anyway, so
that means old as dirt, right? No.
Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. Listen, I got to tell you, the last 2 years, and this is not hyperbole or overstatement, my heart has been broken and I've wept. I've wept over the co-opting of evangelicals, and I'll say it strongly, and the prostitution of the gospel, where we have bowed at the shrine of political power. And it's awful. It is awful. We've attached these barnacles to the cross and to our Christianity, that biblical Christianity has become unrecognizable to a watching world. We're known more for what we are against and our secondary issues. We've put primary passions into secondary causes. And even though we all have our preferences, I have mine, I have the candidates that I would vote for, we must not take that nonsense into the kingdom and into the church. We celebrate the death, burial, and resurrection of our Savior, the Lord Jesus, and there is no salvation in either party. And to borrow a term from you, and I love what you said, that Christian should never be an adjective. It is always a noun, always a noun. There's not a Christian independent, a Christian Republican, a Christian Democrat. Don't allow that term to be eroded by these power bases. Vote for who you want to vote for. Align yourself with that. But as members of the Church of the Living God, don't erect barriers to people coming to Jesus because of our nonsense and our secondary issues. And this is terrible. This is absolutely terrible. And we got to stop being bullied by people who say, well, you got to take a stand. Well, I'm taking a stand. Taking a stand for the empty tomb. I'm taking a stand for Jesus who died on the cross. I'm taking a stand for fighting for the purity of the gospel. Then the repackaging stuff that is mired in Western civilization and Americanism. Now, I might as well get into this. You asked me about the comment that I made, and my wife feels that sometimes I should edit what I say. And so I preached a message at our church, and I won't go into details of it. It's part of a series called Thinking Right About What's Going Wrong. And I was talking about a very familiar passage from the Old Testament that sometimes we hijack, rip it out of its context.
Tell them which one it is.
2 Chronicles 7:14, where we apply that to the United States of America, but, you know, basic hermeneutics 101
I know.
is he's not talking about the United States. He's talking about the nation of Israel, a covenant people.
Yeah.
He's talking about, in its immediate context, them getting the judgment off of them, the disobedient people of God, not the disobedient nations around them, okay? So, but we typically use that as a slapping on the culture and this kind of thing. So, but the message was cool until I made these observations. I said, we need to understand that the White House is not heaven and the president is not God. And then I said, with this caveat, I said, I am committed to this country, and I will die for the freedoms of this country. I still think it's the greatest country in the world, despite all of our sinfulness and other things that are there. Believe that. However, you do need to understand that God does not stand up when our national anthem is played. And so, yeah, wow, yeah. So at the end of the service, I'm in the auditorium, and this woman comes rushing toward me, and she had fire in her eyes. I see her coming, I'm saying, security. And she comes up, and she's shaking, actually, with tears in her eyes, and she says, Crawford, God does stand up when our national anthem is played. And I put my hand on her shoulder and I said, ma'am, I want you to say that slowly so that you hear exactly what you just said to me. But before you say it, let me just say this. You mean to tell me that the sovereign God of the universe bows? Puts his hand over his heart for our country? And she said, well, I guess I'm leaving the church. To which I said, there's no locks on the doors. And I should not have said that last line. So
there's no locks on the doors.
I need to grow in some areas of sensitivity, so.
Okay, the political prostitution of the church. If that doesn't make sense to you, or you're not exactly sure what Crawford's talking about, this is hitting church leaders in that room really heavy. And I so agree. There was a part of me that wanted to stand up and like applaud Crawford for saying this. So this is what he means by the political prostitution of the church. We've abandoned the priorities of Jesus, and we've preferred other things that will never heal. Our country, it will never heal neighbors, it will never heal people in our homes, it will never sustain healing in our own lives and souls. So here is a short list that I've made of what the political prostitution of the church in the last 100 years, or maybe the last 300 years, or even longer. Recently, very recently, the political prostitution of the church means something like falling for believers, people who fill churches, falling for the marketing scheme or the they are wrong and so they are dangerous scheme of the GOP and the Democrats and of CNN and Fox News and many, many more entities that have created this narrative that the other side has said this, or the other side is voting this way, or the other side is proposing this. It's so outlandish, it's dangerous, and we have to stop it. We have to stop the other side by discrediting them. I've made a list here. I want to just read this. By discrediting the other side, eliminating the other side. That's how dangerous their thoughts are, their ideas are. And to listen to our side as if it's the hope of the world. Jesus' rescue of the human heart and human motivations and human character is the hope of the world. There is no other hope. We believe that strongly here. Should you vote? Absolutely should you vote. Can politicians make a difference? Sure they can. Do I believe our environment is in jeopardy? Absolutely I do. I have friends that disagree with me about that. Friends on the right who say, that's been exaggerated. Do I believe that our environment is a calling of God beginning in Genesis 1, that we maintain this earth as reflections of God? Absolutely I do. But I am also convinced that the hope of the world is not a political side in voting on a particular issue. Do I have convictions about guns or guns rights? Sure I do. The Second Amendment? Absolutely. I have convictions about abortion and the abortion issue and what the Supreme Court ruled. I was paying very close attention this whole year leading up to the Supreme Court vote, even before the leak. Yes, I care about these things, but I don't believe any one of them or any personality involved is going to change the human heart, where we are broken by selfishness and this need to ultimately defend ourselves and elevate ourselves and really be in control of our lives. That's what Scripture calls being God. Being in control of our life is being God. And Jesus came to say, only me being your God is going to actually lead you into whole life and what you crave to be, and into the experience of whole humanness, human likeness, truly being fully human. Another example of what I believe Crawford means by the political prostitution of the church. Confusing and choosing democracy, personal independence and rights in place of, as important as our democracy is, and as important as our own individual freedoms and rights are, we somehow in America and in American Christianity believe that that's on the level of what Jesus' priorities are. Jesus has called us to surrender our needs and rights to his priorities. Who's going to stand up and yell and scream about that in election years? Jesus says to follow me and to walk in wholeness and whole life in how I make people fully human and fully alive means you surrender your life to me, to my priorities. Submission. We don't like the word submission. We actually fight against it, and there's even movements in society there's no place for human submission anymore in today's modern world. Jesus calls us to submit, to lower ourselves beneath his mission. That's what submission is, to lower yourself beneath the mission of another. Jesus says you can't really be my disciple. You can't actually be my follower unless you lower yourself beneath my priorities, my mission, that you begin living your life with my love to elevate others. Our vision at Dulles is that Jesus came to offer his body on the sacrificial altar of the cross to end what separated Jews from Gentiles, Jews from non-Jews, and in today's world, those with different levels of conviction about what will make the world better, understanding that it's the power of the one who walked out of the tomb, who now has life over death, working in the collection of those who follow him, that together and only together we have the ability to express a transcendent love and power that heals those who hurt and those who are broken and those who will never, ever find ultimate healing through elections and who our country's leaders are. It's just, that's never going to happen. Paul goes on to say in Ephesians 2 that it was God's desire to create in the body of Jesus one new humanity. I love that language. He is creating one new humanity from broken people into more and more whole people who can share our stories of, man, there's something that's changed me. Come sit with me at church. Let's talk about it together. Let's go have coffee. There was a selfishness in my marriage or in the way I looked at the world, or there was a pessimism that dominated me, and hope has filled me. And Jesus is actually changing the way I look at others, or the way that I look at people who've hurt me, or the way I look at the future. That is what people are craving. They don't want to be preached at. They want to hear your story. They want to hear evidence and people they trust that something's changing them from the inside out, and they will quickly shift their conviction that it will someday happen in the White House or in D.C. to understanding, I think Jesus has worked in my friend who goes to Dulles Church, and I think I want to go sit with them, or I want to have another coffee or another lunch and process this more. Here's how I'm going to just end today. I want to challenge you again to read a book. And if you're not a reader or you're busy in life right now, listen to it. Get it on Audible. It's N.T. Wright. The letter N, the letter T, Wright is my favorite theologian. He wrote a book called Surprised by Hope. It's powerful, and it opens your eyes to what the ultimate calling of the church is supposed to be, which is walking out the rescue of humanity through Jesus' love and Jesus' power and his hope in us. Tell me what you think of this book. Send in questions that you have, like, oh, I've never thought of this before, or what does he mean by this? Let's engage in conversations about this book. It is, it's big to say life-changing. I believe this book is life-changing. On our app this week, when you go to our app and you click our series graphic, you can get to a list of questions each week. Here's the question of the week. What passion have you allowed to overpower? Maybe it's a political passion. Maybe it's a passion for money or career or a person. What passion have you allowed to overpower the plan of Jesus' love and movement through his church? What have you allowed in your life to become a passion that has become greater than your passion for Jesus' priorities, his plan, particularly to use you in his church, in this world? And then I'm going to close with this, and I'm going to read this prayer. I mean, this is a prayer I wrote to share with you today. I'm going to ask you to pray this week. Pull out your notes, your phone app, rewind this or pause it and go back and watch this if you need to go get pen and paper or your notes app on your phone. This is the prayer that I want to ask you, challenge you as your pastor to spend time with God on today. It's a simple one-liner. Jesus, will you grow in me? Will you do this? Will you grow in me, inside of me, a passion for your purposes and for the movement of your church? Will you grow in me as I've been passionate about our country or my neighbor who's offended me or I can't believe people would vote this, or I can't believe the Supreme Court, or we need to change the White House, or we need to keep the White House. Whatever your passions have been, would you honestly approach Jesus with this? Jesus, will you grow in me instead a passion for your purposes, for your vision, and for the movement, specifically for the movement of your church? That's our prayer today. I love you guys. I love being church with you. Don't be a church attender. Don't just attend. If you live somewhere else or different parts of the country, engage with, financially give. I'm not big into asking for giving. Be invested with us, or pray for our church and the movement of our church, wherever you live, in Florida or in the Midwest or the West Coast, wherever you live. Participate by praying. God, use me and use us, use you as we reflect you to the outside world. Engage. Do whatever it takes. Don't let anything stop you. Don't let distance stop you. You can become a partner of prayer. You can invest financially. You can read books with us and engage with questions, or your questions will help us get clearer about how to. Your question is probably a question so many people in our church have. Just engage, become part of the church, and not just an attender. We're building a church here. We're not attending a church, we're building a church. And I love that you're doing that with me and that we're doing this together. I love you guys so much. I can't wait to see you next week.